First, we want to thank Ms. Benarito, Mr. Lombardi, and Dean Henry for inviting us to speak to you about the trip we took to Germany last month.
Also, thank you to all of Marshall's teachers who supported his decision to miss class for this ceremony.
We would also like to recognize and thank two survivors of this terrible period who are with us. Oma, Leah Krell Weems, who is my grandmother, and my great-aunt, Ruth Krell Steinfeld. They're the reason we're speaking to you today.
Think about your family and what you know about its history. Most of what you know came from the people around you, your parents, grandparents, and other family members who share their stories and memories. One day, you'll retell those stories to your children and then to your grandchildren. Whatever your family's history might be, it will be your history too, and then your children's history.
We all have a different way of praying, and our faiths may be different, but there are some universal principles that we all hold. One comes from the fifth commandment: honor your father and mother. One of the ways we honor them is to carry their lives and their memory into the future by remembering their stories. That's why we went to Germany, and that's why we're talking to you today.
Ladenburg is a small town, but it's a colorful one and well known in Germany. It dates back to the 1st century and was a Roman settlement within a wall. Ladenburgers are proud of their long history. It's part of the city's culture and its attraction as a tourist spot. That may be why this unique project, dedicated to remembering, was adopted by the city, even though it would mean having to face some very ugly truths.
Just before Oma was born, during the late 1920s and early 1930s, Germany was experiencing great economic and social hardship. The Germans had just been defeated in World War I, and Germany was forced to pay huge reparations to the Allies. Germans suffered terrible inflation and mass unemployment. Anna and Alfred Krell had two girls, Leah in 1932 and Ruth in 1933. This photo is from November 1937. It's the only family portrait we have, and we only can identify 7 of the people. That's because almost every shred of evidence about their lives was destroyed or taken, so the photos that we have are very precious. Like archaeologists who have to analyze shards of pottery for clues, we have to analyze each remnant we have to find our family history.
So if we look closer, we can see that everyone looks well dressed and well fed. But we also notice that despite being a wedding photo, no one seems very happy. Even the bride looks worried. My mother, the little girl on the left, and my aunt look so cute with flowers in their hair, but their expressions aren't happy. That's probably because by this time, laws had been put into effect restricting the girls from going to school, to parks, or even to playgrounds. There were even benches and streets that were prohibited to you if you were Jewish. Hitler used the Jews as a scapegoat and blamed them for all of Germany's problems. His plan was to exterminate the Jewish race. Through propaganda and through apathy, he almost succeeded. Whenever there is war, people die. We all know that. Even civilians die, and that is horrible and it's tragic. This loss, however, is different. Hitler created a systematic process to dehumanize and eliminate a particular race of people. That's genocide, and because of this massive scale of genocide, it's called the Holocaust. One other point to think about. In Germany, a Jew was defined as anyone with either 3 or 4 Jewish grandparents. Therefore, even people who had converted to and had been practicing Christianity for 2 generations were subject to these laws and others that were much worse.
Hitler's final solution to the Jewish problem was his plan for complete elimination of Jews from all over Europe. To accomplish this, Jews were rounded up and forced to leave their homes. In October of 1940, every member of our family was sent to the center of town along with every Jew from Ladenburg. They were gathered with Jewish people from many other cities and then loaded into cattle cars of a train. Our family was sent to the Gurs concentration camp. The Gurs concentration camp, located just over the border in France, is where Oma's childhood ended. She was just 8 years old. This would be the first of many unfamiliar and scary places she would be sent.
There were thousands of people living in Gurs in terrible condition. Her father was separated from them immediately, but Mom remembers being with her mother and her sister. As little girls do, she believed that as long as she was with her mother, she'd be protected and safe. But there wasn't enough food or clothing or health care. They were cold and hungry, and she remembers people crying and moaning all the time. Then, about a year later, Mom and her sister were put on a bus. She remembers her mother standing in the cold filth of the camp, waving goodbye. This was the last time they would ever see their mother. They learned later that their mother had, in fact, protected them. She made the difficult decision to send them away from her so that they could survive. It was part of a secret operation sponsored by OSE, a French children's rescue organization. OSE smuggled them and hundreds of children out of the camps.
They arrived at the first of several hiding places around France, and they were told to forget everything they knew about their lives. They were told never to speak German again, learn French very quickly, pretend you're Christian. Even their Jewish names were changed. Boys were harder to hide. Jewish boys could be identified by the Nazis because Jewish boys are circumcised at birth. Each time the Nazis got close to finding them, they were moved. Anyone caught sheltering Jews could be killed. Leah and Ruth were hidden in many places, orphanages, churches, and small farms. For a while, a poor farmer and his family helped hide the girls. They remember being so hungry there that they ate raw potatoes right out of the fields, but the family shared what they had. Years later, the 2 sisters went back to thank the farmer's daughter for her family's help. There are many anonymous heroes like that farmer, whom we call righteous Gentiles, and we remember and honor them in synagogues and in Israel at the National Holocaust Memorial.
Until 1981, Mom didn't know what happened to her parents. Then research led her to a book that chronicled the fate of all the Jews transported through France. That's when she learned her parents had been sent to Auschwitz, the biggest, most infamous death camp. Jews say a special mourner's prayer on the anniversary of a family member's death. Mom can't fulfill this requirement completely because she can't know the exact dates of her parents' deaths. Instead, she mourns on the date that they were loaded into the cattle car bound for Auschwitz. We've told you all this to explain why the Stolpersteine project was so important to us. Those that died in Auschwitz weren't given a burial or a headstone, nor is there any place to pay our respects to them. This picture shows more discoveries for us. As you can see from the small box, the Nazis broke Jewish gravestones throughout the country, attempting to erase Jews from existence. Ladenburg restored theirs. That's how we were able to discover this one, Marshall's great, 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 grandmother. Notice that the line of gravestones ends suddenly with the last three. That's because the day after the deportation, there wasn't one Jewish person left. Still today, no Jewish people live here. Do you see the last stones? They are so much simpler than the others, especially the very last one.
Do you remember the photo of the wedding? Berta Kapustin is the last stone. She was my great-great-grandmother. When we found the last stone, we learned that she had died before the deportation. But look at her stone. It's concrete, not marble. Very poor, with very little writing, indicating that by 1938, times were hard for the Jews of Germany. When we were invited by the government of Ladenburg to attend the installation of the stones, we knew we had to be there. For us, these stones are as sacred as gravestones. We gathered at my Oma's house in Ladenburg. It's now an artist's home and gallery. And she got to tour it after almost 70 years. Many Ladenburgers came out to witness the ceremony. It was very emotional.
The Stolpersteine stones are placed in the sidewalk in front of the home. And they say, "Here lived Alfred and Anna Krell, deported 1940 to Gurs, murdered 1942 in Auschwitz." They also honor my mom and auntie and indicate that they survived. These stones say to the world Anna and Alfred Krell existed and had a life here in Ladenburg. They weren't erased from history. Gunter Demnig is not Jewish. He's a German who wanted to change the nameless deaths of death camp victims. There were 6 million Jewish deaths at the hands of the Nazis. It's hard to get your mind around that big number. These memorial stones bring each death to a personal level we can comprehend. Stolperstein means stumbling stones in German. Why such an interesting name? Mr. Demnig believes that by putting the stones where everyone walks, in front of the places where murdered souls used to live or work, then passers-by will emotionally falter or stumble and be forced to reflect on what happened. Hence, the name Stolpersteine. The project began in 1996 by placing a few stones. Then other communities wanted his work in their cities. Now he's installed stones in towns throughout Germany, and they are being installed in Austria, Hungary, and the Netherlands and Italy. Incidentally, this project is not universally accepted. Even in the beautiful, intellectual city of Ladenburg, there are objections.
In the center of town, there's a large clothing store with living quarters above. It had been the store and home of a Jewish family. After the owners were deported, some locals took over the store under controversial circumstances. When the city prepared to place the stones commemorating the first owners, the current owners objected. Miss Wagner and her committee created public interest in the issue, and the storekeepers backed down.
Ladenburg refused to accept our donation from us, any donation from us to offset their expenses for the artist's work. This is a project by Germans, for Germans. You can see that there are 4 plaques from our family, but there are 2 others. Ms. Wagner of the Historical Society told us this amazing story. A young couple, Mr. and Mrs. Lowenfels, came to Ladenburg, but they didn't have any place to live. The young wife was pregnant. We don't know if they were friends or strangers, but our family invited them to live with them. Just before the deportation, Mrs. Lowenfels delivered a baby boy. At the train station, when they realized where they were headed, the Lowenfels found a nun and begged her to keep their baby. As you can see from their stones, Mr. and Mrs. Lowenfels were murdered in Auschwitz. But, like my mom, that baby was saved because of the sacrifices made by his parents and by a virtuous bystander. A long time ago, Mom and Auntie decided to remember the past by helping others learn about it. They've traveled all over to speak to schools, universities, clubs, and other assemblies. Here, Mom is speaking at the state capitol in Austin.
But that generation is getting older, and it's hard for them to continue. Now it's time to reflect on our responsibility to remember and never forget. Though it was at times a sad trip, we were happy to be together in Germany. Our president said, "Thank you for remembering us and our families." But it also said, "Hitler didn't win. We survived and we thrived." We leave you with the biblical inscription that we saw at the Washington, D.C. Museum, which commands us to remember. Thank you for having us.